Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Snackbox. Hope you all are having an amazing day, guys. We have some more news about the new content, and in this video, we are going to talk about two new bosses. There will be more than that, I think, as far as I know. So for now, we just have the info for two bosses. For one, Phrygius, the Trove Master, and Mimic. So those two are the new bosses that we're going to talk about. So let's jump right into it. So here we have Phrygius. And let's take a look at the passives first. I always like to check those out first to see what are we able to do, what debuffs can we use, and so on, and also what is this boss immune to, and so on. So let's see. Let's start from the bottom, actually. Flameproof. Damage from HP burn debuffs cannot exceed 1% of the boss max HP. Then, unfaltering speed, immune to decreased speed debuffs and turn meter reduction effects. So we cannot control the turn meter, we cannot control the speed. Maybe we can destroy the speed or decrease the speed with Theodosia, that might work. But other than that, you cannot slow this boss down, okay? Then, damage from skills that scale based on enemy max HP cannot exceed 5% of the max HP when attacking the boss. So we cannot deal more than 5% damage with a max HP hit. But still, with Marius, with Newt, you still do 15% damage, and that's a lot, right? So Almighty Strength limits our max HP damage. Awakened Weakness. So this is very important for a lot of hard dungeons and, just the newer bosses in general. For each awakening level on the target champion, 2.5% for levels 1 to 2 and 5% for levels 3 to 6 stacks up to 25%. The damage inflicted by the boss will be decreased. So the more or the higher your blessing is, the higher your awakening level, the less damage your champions will take. Very important. Increases the damage received by the boss for each awakening level as well. Stacks up the same amount. So if you have a 6-star blessing, you will deal 50% more damage, which is a lot, right? 50% more damage is a lot. Even if you have only an awakening level of 2, you will deal 10% more damage. And then from 3, it's 20 and so on. And then it adds up. That's a lot of damage, really. That really makes a big difference. So I guess this content really depends on you having high blessings. At least that makes it a lot easier, right? Almighty Immunity, so immune to stun, freeze, sleep, provoke, block active skills, block passives, fear, true fear, petrification, berserk, enfeeble, nullify, ensnare, fatigue, and hunter's gaze. Also immune to HP exchange effects, HP balancing effects, and cooldown increasing effects. So you cannot lock him out, you cannot control him, you cannot block any of the skills, not the passive, and so on. So uncontrollable, basically. All right, so let's sum it up. No decreased speed, HP burn cannot deal more than 1% damage. Max HP hits cannot deal more than 5% damage. And then you get damage mitigation and a damage multiplier if you have souls on your champions. Also, he's immune to any control debuff or any type of HP balancing. And also, you cannot increase his cooldowns. So let's see what the actual kit does now. The A1, mine. Attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of stealing one random buff from each enemy. Okay, AoE attack, he can steal one buff. It's a random buff. It doesn't say what buff this attack will steal. And also, 50%, 50-50, right? How can you avoid this? Protection sets, right? Have resistance on your champions, something like that. So I'm pretty curious to see how much resistance we need to resist those debuffs or stealing effects, right? So yeah, we will have to wait and see. The A2 can't catch me. Free turn cooldown, attacks all enemies, so 2 AoE hits again. Places a 30% decreased speed debuff and a 50% decreased attack debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. Steals 30% of each target's turn meter. This effect cannot be resisted by targets under any buffs. And most likely you will have a team with buffs, right? The damage inflicted by this skill is increased by 10% for each gold-plated layer. So that seems like a new buff. Gold-plated. The gold-plated buff grants Phrygius the Trove Master layers of additional HP beyond their max HP. Gold-plated layers cannot be removed, stolen, or have their duration increased or decreased. When Phrygius receives damage while under gold-plated layers, it is first applied to the gold-plated layers. So each layer of gold-plated can block a certain amount of damage, and it is destroyed after receiving that amount of damage. When a gold-plated layer is destroyed, Phrygius will receive the damage equal to the value of that gold-plated layer. And other enemies will also receive a portion of the damage. Any surplus damage to a gold-plated layer is dealt directly to Phrygius' HP. So that seems like, a shield type of thing, right? It's kind of like a shield with layers. So, it has something like, it gives me a little bit the vibe of the Fire Knight shield, for example, just a little bit different. So, every time you break these gold-plated layers, he will get damaged. Pretty interesting, but you will also get damaged, right? As it said here. All right, let's take a look at the A3 now. Places 5 layers of gold-plated on Phrygius the Trove Master. Each layer is equal to 10% of Phrygius' max HP. Okay, so there's the gold-plated skill. 5 layers, that means 50% of his HP right there. If you deplete or destroy those gold-plated layers, then he will get 50% damage, which is a lot, right? So whenever a layer is destroyed, deals damage to Phrygius equal to the value of the gold-plated layer. Also deals damage to Phrygius enemies equal to 5% of the gold-plated layer value. That is kind of crazy because think about it, if he has a really high max HP, right, 10% can be a lot, right? So, I mean, we are getting 5% damage of that gold-plated layer, but if it's 10% of, I don't know how much HP, and then 5% of those 10% will be taken as damage from our champions, that could hurt, right? That could really hurt, but it depends on the max HP of this boss. Fills Phrygius' turn meter by 10% each time a gold-plated layer is destroyed, while on the gold-plated layers, Phrygius cannot evade. Oh, we actually forgot to read one passive, so that's the 24 Karat Thief. Has a 10% chance of evading an enemy's skill, and all of its accompanying effects increases Phrygius' speed by 5 and chance to evade by 2% each turn he is under at least one gold-plated layer. Stacks up to 200 speed and 50% evade chance. So basically, every time he takes a turn, it gets harder to kill him if he's not under gold-plated layers. So I guess the best way to kill him probably is to, get rid of those gold-plated layers as soon as he puts them on. But, he only places 5 layers of gold-plated every 5 turns. So, the first time he uses this skill, and he probably will start using, he will open up with this skill, then you can probably, get rid of 50% HP, but then it's going to take some turns until he puts them up again. So maybe you really have to deplete those 5 gold-plated layers very quickly if you can. Make sure he doesn't take too many turns while he has those gold-plated layers on, because he will ramp up his speed, which is kind of insane, and also his evading chance, right? And evade can be really annoying, right? So he will start with a 10% chance of evading, but he can stack it up to 50%. That's kind of crazy. Now he cannot evade when he's under those gold-plated layers, which is good, right? So that means we can always hit those gold-plated layers. So yeah, pretty interesting. Yes, I think we definitely need hard-hitting champions. We need those max HP champions. That those will probably shine, even though they will only deal 5% of the boss's max HP as damage. But still, that's like half of the value of a gold plate. So not bad. I can see a ninja being good, for example, with a Mikage ally attacks. Right? We definitely want something like protected block debuffs, so our team gets not, controlled with the decreased speed and decreased attack. And yeah, and I think the main goal here is obviously to deplete the gold plates or to destroy them as fast as you can. So Marius will be a big one. Knut will be a big one. Kind of interesting. Interesting mechanic. Like I said, gives me a feel of Fire Knight, kind of, just a little bit different. And yeah, okay. So first boss looks kind of annoying, but on paper, I don't know. I'm not really worried about this one, to be honest. All right, next boss in line, the Mimic. Pretty cool that we have a Mimic now in the game. A very popular creature, right, in like fantasy games and other franchises. So pretty interesting. Let's go over the passives first, and now we won't miss one. So let's see. Fortune's Feast. For every free buffs the enemy team receives, decreases the cooldown of the feeding time skill by 1 turn. That's the A3. At the start of the Mimic's turn, if there is a mini-mimic present in the battle, heals the mimic by 25% of its max HP. Pretty nuts, actually. So we're getting punished for buffs. Almighty Immunity, pretty much the same as on Phrygius, no controls whatsoever. Almighty Persistence, all turn meter reduction effects are decreased by 50%. That means we can decrease the turn meter. So this feels more like the spider, right? Awakened Weakness, so the same thing with the Blessings and Awakening level. Almighty Strength, also max HP hits, and the Flameproof for HP burns. Okay, very similar. You can put the decreased speed on this boss though, and you can decrease the turn meter, but the effects will be reduced by 50%. The turn meter reduction will be reduced by 50%, right? So not bad. So that means we can control the turn meter and the speed. Now let's see. The A1, Plunder Pounce. Attacks all enemies, deals additional pure damage equal to 5% of each target's max HP for each buff on them. Has a 50% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. Wow. So buffs? No. It's a no-no. We don't want buffs on our champions. Lashing Spyro, 3 turn cooldown, that's the A2. Attacks one enemy, so single target attack. Places a stun debuff for 1 turn. Will attack all remaining enemies if the stun debuff wasn't placed. Decreases the turn meters of all enemies without a stun debuff by 30%. Wow, okay, so I'm not quite sure if you want to get stunned here or not, but it seems like you might want to have a stun target or something. Pretty interesting. I think this one sounds a little bit more annoying than the other one, but let's keep on reading. Maybe the A3 is more annoying than what we already see here. So, Feeding Time, 5 turn cooldown, summons a mini mimic to the battle who ingests the enemy with the highest crit damage for 4 turns. Wow, okay, so we have we have mini mimics that are, eating our champions, I guess. The mini mimics HP is equal to 20% of the mimic's HP. Its defense is equal to 70% of the mimic's defense, and it has the same resistance as the mimic. So my question here is, what if we destroy the max HP of the mimic and decrease the defense? Will the HP and defense also be lower from the mini mimic? These are kind of the questions that are popping up when I read this. At the start of the mimic's turn, the mini mimic deals damage equal to 25% of the target's champion's current HP. Okay, so every time this every time the mimic takes a turn, the mini mimic will deal 25% damage to the ingested champion. After 4 turns, or when the mini mimic is defeated, the target champion is returned to battle and the mini mimic leaves the battle. Only one champion can be transferred into the mini mimic at a time. Places a 30% decreased speed debuff on all other enemies for 2 turns. Wow, so I think A cleanser would be cool for this, to get rid of the decreased speed and the stun maybe, and also the decreased attack. You definitely want to you want to kill this mini mimic as fast as possible so that champion doesn't get a lot of damage. And you can keep damaging the boss because your damage dealer will get ingested by this mini mimic. So that seems like the main goal. Ingest. When summoned to battle, the mini mimic will ingest the enemy champion with the highest crit damage. Whenever the mimic takes a turn in battle, the mini mimic will deal damage to the ingested champion equal to 25% of their current HP. The ingested champion will be freed from the mini mimic when it's defeated or after 4 turns have passed. While ingested, a champion is considered removed from battle. They cannot receive buffs, debuffs, or instant effects, and they cannot be selected as a target for a skill. The ingested state cannot be removed except by defeating the mini mimic or waiting for 4 turns. Now, if you wait for 4 turns, your champion will probably be dead because you can't heal him, I think. You cannot buff him. So every time, after 4 turns, he will get, total of 100% damage of their HP, right? So you don't want to wait, right? You want to defeat this mini mimic. When ingesting a champion, the mini mimic will ignore block debuffs, veil, perfect veil, and resistance. A champion can still be ingested even if they already have 10 debuffs on them. No more than 1 mini mimic can be present in a battle at any time, and no more than 1 champion can be ingested at a time. The mimic cannot use the feeding time skill to summon more than 1 mini mimic to battle. Interesting. So we will always, he will summon 1 mini mimic at max, and that mini mimic will ingest one of your champions, so steal one of your champions. So you definitely want to have at least 2 damage dealers in this battle, right? One will get ingested and the other one needs to free the ingested champion. That is kind of the goal. And also, if you don't get rid of this mini mimic, the mimic will heal by 25% of its max HP. That's a lot of heal, right? So yeah, you definitely want to get rid of this mini mimic as fast as possible. The mini mimic is going to have 20% of the mimic's HP. So I guess it's a little bit tanky. I don't think you can get rid of it that easy, and that's where the awakened weakness comes in, right? Where you increase the damage for every awakening level. That's where, that comes in handy. So yeah, I guess, you want to have decreased speed here on this boss, so it doesn't take too many turns. You want to have turn meter control, right? Decreasing turn meter, filling turn meter. You don't want to have too many buffs. That's not good. I guess you cannot really go without any buffs, but you want to have at least turn meter control. And I think, somebody like Coldheart could be cool here. Maybe. I don't know, but she has a full turn meter depletion. That could be nice. So if you can control this turn meter somehow while boosting your turn meter, that might be the way to do this. But at the same time, we are not really in control what champions we can use. I actually asked how this works when we select our decks, right? For the hard mode, for example, you have 2 decks and 20 champions. Depending on which deck you use, you will have an option of, like, I don't know, 8 champions out of that deck that you can choose, but you can only use 5 champions in a battle, right? But you will be presented like 8 champions that you can choose from, right? So it's not as bad as I thought. I thought it was completely random that you just get 5 champions out of that deck, but you can actually choose from a little bit bigger pool, I guess. So it's not as bad as I thought, but it's gonna be tough because it's not that easy to build 20 champions, in a proper way, or even have 20 good champions. And then having 2 decks, that's 40. I don't think a lot of people can do this. I don't think a lot of people can pull that off, to have 20 or even 40 well-geared champions. That's really hard to do. And I think that's going to be a big, big issue for a lot of accounts. Even for the top players, that's going to be a tough one, right? Now, the one thing that will help with stuff like this are dupes. So if you have dupes of insane champions like Marichka, Galathier, and so on, you might want to hold on to them. This new content gives a little bit more value to them, to those dupes. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much all for now. I'm pretty sure we're gonna get more information about the other bosses and so on. But for now, these two seem quite challenging, especially if you consider that you can't really control which champions you are, facing them with. So it's gonna be tough. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, please hit the like button. It really goes a long way. Also, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more raid content. The YouTube algorithm's gonna suggest you a video that you might like right here, and see you in the next one.